Hey guys, it's Chris at Highland Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that you'll find this video to be interesting and entertaining and informative. And then by the end of the video, perhaps you'll consider subscribing. After all, it is free. In today's video, I'm going to be covering part 2 of my ambitious neck-thru guitar build. And I introduced that in the last episode, kind of give you an idea of what the design is going to be. So what I'm going to do in this video is we're going to jump in the car and head out on a lumber buying safari. Now, what is a lumber buying safari? Well, I don't stockpile wood when I build my guitars. So as a result, when I get ready to start a new project, I have to go out and purchase the wood for the body, sometimes the top, the neck, and the fretboard. And the reason I don't stockpile wood is because, well, there's actually a couple of reasons. First of all, it takes up space, and I don't want to take up space with a lot of lumber. And when you're storing lumber, you need to do it in a certain way in order to ensure that it won't warp or bend or twist or crack or any of that kind of thing. And I really don't want to go through the trouble to do that. Also, there's an investment involved. You have to spend a lot of money to get all the wood that you need to stockpile it and to build up a quantity of wood. And in truth, because of where I live, I don't need to stockpile and store lumber. I live in a very arid climate. The humidity levels where I live, which is in the Denver metro area in Colorado, United States of America, the humidity levels usually stay pretty consistent at or below 40% humidity. So I don't really have to worry about fluctuating levels of humidity, which is dire when it comes to using wood for building guitars. Typically, you want to keep your humidity levels down below 50%, or less. And that means you have to have a climate controlled environment, which is one of the reasons why you see a lot of guitar builders, both big time and small time, who have climate controlled environments where they store their wood. Well, since I live in such an arid, dry climate, I don't really need to do that. And that's an advantage to me because when I'm going to build a guitar, oftentimes when I'm shopping for wood, I don't want to be locked into specific types of wood. So if I was stockpiling wood, I'd be locked in to the species of wood that I purchased and have on hand. And I don't really like to work that way. I like to, sort of shop for wood kind of the same way that folks will shop for clothing. Sometimes you go out there, you don't know what you're going to end up purchasing, and whatever you get can be a surprise at the end of the day. Well, that's kind of the way I am when it comes to shopping for wood. When I get to the different lumber suppliers, and I have 4 that I use in the Denver metro area. I use Austin Hardwoods, Paxton Lumber, Rockler, and Woodcraft. And I'll kind of make a circuit to each one of these places looking for different kinds of wood to use in a guitar build. And sometimes I'll hit one place several times before I end up getting all the wood that I need for a guitar build. I may purchase my mahogany at Austin, and then I may purchase a flamed maple blank from Woodcraft or Rockler, whatever. And I'll go back and forth until I find all the wood that I want for a guitar build. And that way I can purchase the wood that I feel is going to work best for the particular build. And because I live in such an arid, dry climate, I really don't have to worry about fluctuations in the humidity and how that's going to affect the wood. So let's jump in the car and let's start making the rounds and see what we can find for this guitar build. My first stop was at Austin Hardwoods. And I began by looking at some 8/4 maple that I'm going to use for the neck. And this particular maple that I'm looking at is Eastern rock maple, which is really hard maple. And normally I like to use a quarter sawn wood for my guitar necks, but quarter sawn wood can be really difficult to source, can be really expensive. And as long as you're using a straight grained hard maple, you can get away with flatter riffs on wood, and it'll work just fine, especially since I'm probably going to put carbon fiber stiffeners in the neck anyways. But I want to make sure that there are no knots, that there are no cracks, no warps, bends, twists, nothing like that. You can't fix that stuff. If it's there, it's going to stay there. So I try to find a perfectly straight slab of wood that has no flaws in it. Of course, whenever I'm shopping for wood, I like to check the moisture content, and here I'm using a Klein pinless moisture meter. I don't know how accurate it is, but my lumber supplier kind of looks down upon using a pinned moisture meter since it pokes holes in the wood. The wood that I ended up purchasing for this guitar is going to be, like I said, the rock maple for the neck, mahogany for the body. I already had a slab of black poison wood for the top, and then Paduke for the fretboard. After I got the wood home, it was time to process the lumber into blanks that I can use for making the body, the neck, and the fretboard. Now I realize that not everybody watching has the ability to process their own wood this way. However, if you can find access to a wood shop that has a table saw, a joiner, a planer, you can really save a lot of money. For example, this neck blank, it's 10 feet long, 9.5 inches wide, and 2 inches thick. I'll be able to process it into 8 blanks for necks, 2 of which will be neck-throughs, and the other 6 blanks will be for either bolt-in or set-in necks. So there's a real economy of savings here if you can get access to a wood shop. As I'm processing this wood, let me talk a little bit more about purchasing lumber for building guitars. And as you can tell, I like to purchase from local suppliers. I really feel it's important to be able to look at the wood, to hold it in my hands, and to check it out carefully before I make the purchase. But I realize that's not always possible. And there are times when I've gone to my lumber suppliers and haven't been able to find what I need. And that means we have to rely on the internet. Unfortunately, many of the sellers on the internet have caught on to what luthiers are looking for when it comes to wood. As a result, when you start shopping for wood, you're going to see absolutely bogus terms like 4A, 5A, luthier grade, instrument quality, all those kind of terms that are affixed to the wood. There is no grading system for the wood that we purchase. That is completely made up. And one man's 5A can be another man's 3A. It doesn't mean anything. Now you can use it kind of as a starting point to look at the wood and see if maybe it's going to be something that'll work for you. But there's no legitimate grading system. So just be aware of that. And when you're shopping for wood, the problem is you're not going to be able to hold it in your hands and see it. And a lot of times the photos that you'll see on the internet are dolled up, so to speak, to make the wood look better than it actually is. So be careful of that. Now, there are a couple of suppliers that I have used, and I'll put links down in the description below to who those suppliers are. One is Curly Maplewood, the other is Commercial Forest Products, and the other is Oregon Wildwood. So those are companies that I can vouch for. They've always provided good service to me. There are others out there that I know are also good, but I don't deal with them that often, so don't bother asking me what I think of them. You'll have to do that on your own. Now here's another good example of why processing your own lumber can save you a lot of money. The board you're looking at is a piece of Paduke, and I paid $20 for this slab of wood, and I should be able to get 6 fretboards out of that $20 piece of wood. So think about the cost of a processed, prefabricated fretboard blank. Now the tools that you need when it comes to processing your own lumber are going to be a table saw, or at the very least a circular saw, a band saw, usually a 14-inch band saw with a resaw capacity of at least 7 inches. That way you can process your own billets for doing your figured tops. And I also have a joiner, and I just got a simple 6-inch benchtop joiner, and that works just fine for the purposes of joining wood for guitar building. And then I have a planer, and the planer that I have has a capacity of 13 inches of width. You need at least 7 inches, or at least I did, because my body blanks are made from 2 pieces. Each are 7 inches wide, so I needed to have a planer that had at least 7 inches of capacity, and most will be 12 inches or more than that. Ideally, you'd like to get a helical cutting head on your planer, but that isn't absolutely critical. As you'll see, and I'll explain in a minute, it's having straight blade planer works just fine. Same thing with the joiner. And then, of course, with these tools, you need to have some kind of dust extraction. Otherwise, your workshop space is going to be an absolute mess. And it's also, there's a health concern. And I've got a dust collector for all my tools. And then I have a great big, huge dust extraction system built into the ceiling of my shop, which keeps the air clear. If you're going to build more than one guitar, you really need to invest in a planer. And like I said, I'm just using a simple benchtop 13-inch capacity straight blade planer, and it works great. A while back, I had purchased a big slab of black poison wood, and I resawed it into a book-matched top, and that's what I'm going to use for this guitar. There are also 2 other pieces of wood that I need for this guitar build. One is going to be the headstock plate, and then the other is the control cavity cover. Those always tend to get forgotten about during the process of selecting wood, but in this case I was able to go through my stash of scraps and find some wood that will work. And for the headstock plate, I'm going to use a piece of black poison wood that I had left over from an earlier project, and a nice little piece of flamed maple for the control cavity cover. But they'll have to be planed to the proper thickness before I can actually fabricate them. A lot of guys watching this video are going to wonder why I'm using a straight blade planer instead of a helical planer, which is supposed to do a better job of planing figured wood like this little piece of flamed maple. Well, you don't really need a helical planer, and for one thing, they're almost double the price of a straight blade planer. All you have to do is know how to feed the wood through the planer, and typically what I do is I just do a light skim pass through the planer, and if I notice any tear out, I'll flip the board around and feed it through the other direction, and that usually will take care of it. And another thing that I like to do is to run the board through at a slight angle. That way the blades aren't cutting along the length of the grain. It's kind of cutting diagonally across it, and there seems to be less of an issue with tear out when I do that. Most of these benchtop planers can't plane a piece of wood thinner than 1/8 of an inch. So since my headstock plate is going to be 1/16 of an inch, I have to get creative here. And the way I approach this is I simply take my blank that I'm going to use, and I will glue it down to another thicker board using some CA glue and some accelerator just in the corners. And then that way I can run it through the planer and plane it down until I get it to the thickness that I'm shooting for, which, like I said, is 1/16 of an inch. And then once I'm done, and once I've reached that thickness, the next step is to remove the piece from that scrap wood. So to do that, I use a heat gun, and I simply gently and carefully heat the wood until it breaks the bond of the glue, and then it comes off fairly easily. All right, well, I've got all the wood processed into blanks and ready to start building the guitar. I've got my headstock piece, which is black poison wood. I've got my flamed maple control cavity cover. I've got a nice piece of Padauk for the fretboard. This is my Eastern Rock maple neck blank, which is 1 3/4 inches thick, 40 inches long, and 5 inches wide. So nice big slab of wood. And check out that grain. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it's perfectly straight. And that's what I always look for when selecting wood for a neck. I want the straightest grain I can possibly find. That's one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to use figured maple for a neck blank. Yeah, sure, it looks pretty, but that wood is so incredibly unreliable and unpredictable in how it will move when exposed to changes in humidity. So with a nice straight grain piece of maple, there's a better chance that it's going to remain straight and not warp, bend, or twist. Now for the body, I'm using book-matched black poison wood, and the back of the body blank is 2 pieces of African mahogany. So what I'm going to do in the next episode is I'm going to glue these pieces down to the mahogany, and then I will glue the 2 pieces together. And there's actually quite a bit involved in that process, so be sure to check that out once I get it posted next week. And as always, I hope you got something out of this episode. I hope you found it entertaining and educational. If so, give me a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, again, welcome. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and will consider clicking that subscribe button because it's free. There's not a lot that's free in life anymore, is there? At any rate, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.